Have you ever noticed how quickly we forget how things used to be? There was a time that, well, not that long ago really, when Japanese bikes were seen as a bit of a joke. They were properly dismissed as cheap and flimsy and, well, brands that just weren't to be trusted compared to what we were building here back in the UK. They were openly referred to as Jap crap, like it was just accepted truth. And then in 1959, Honda turned up at the Isle of Man TT, as if to say, well, let's see what this is all about. And they didn't do it quietly either. They made a point of it. They entered the most brutal and respected race in the world just to show that these bikes were up to the job. Now, granted, they didn't win straight away, but within 5 years of entering that race, they'd won various world titles across different motorsports, all to do with motorcycling. And within a decade, they'd completely reshaped what motorcycles could be. They were faster, more reliable, more accessible, and the whole industry then shifted. And now we have the likes of Honda, Yamaha and Suzuki, and these are all the benchmarks that riders are recommended. And they're recommended to them on a daily basis in new rider groups and forums, where people say that they're just the most reliable and trustworthy brands that any beginner biker could ride. So here's the question that I want to talk about in today's video. Are we watching that very same thing happen all over again, right now, with another group of manufacturers that are being talked about in a very similar way? I'm obviously referring to the Chinese brands. And depending on who you ask, they're either the best thing to happen to motorcycling in years, or something to be avoided at absolutely all costs. Now, before I dive in and answer that question, I really do want to give a quick notice to this week's video sponsor. It is, of course, LITELOK. These guys have been sponsoring a number of videos over recent weeks. I'll save you the full breakdown because there is a dedicated video on these guys at the pop-up banner above, which you can go and find. But the abridged version is this. I use this lock because it is one of the best on the market. It uses a baronium core that makes it angle grinder resistant and turns the power of those cutting discs back in on themselves, destroying the disc in the process and really slowing down those criminals from taking your bike. And it often prevents the theft from happening in any case. And before you say, well, they'll just use a diamond-coated cutting disc jack, or they'll just have multiple discs. Well, yeah, you're probably right if they really went at it and they had the time. But thanks to its anti-twist shackle, it means that even if they did manage to get through it once, they'd have to make a second cut, spending even longer on the bike just to get it off. And that's using time that these criminals simply do not have. As I said, I own one. It's right here. I use it when I'm out and about. I trust it. There is an affiliate link in the description below that costs you nothing extra if you go and buy through it. But it does help me keep making these free-to-view videos for you guys, as it does generate me a little bit of commission. Anyways, straight off the bat, sponsor out the way, let's get back to talking about those Chinese bikes. And I'll openly admit that, well, early on in my riding career, I was firmly in the camp of these bikes need to be avoided at all costs. And I still will admit that I've got one foot sat in that camp. There's a little bit of skepticism about them. But if you strip that opinion away and you just look at what's actually happening factually, then I think things are a little bit more interesting. And I think we as a community need to give them a bit more chance, because this isn't just some distant, maybe one day they'll be more accepted situation anymore. As of right now, Chinese bikes already make up 12.7% of new motorcycle sales in the UK. That's 1 in every 8 bikes leaving a dealership between August 2023 and July 2024. It's an estimated 11,601 bikes, Chinese manufacturers out there right now on the road. And you don't get those numbers by accident. That takes proper strategic planning, aggressive pricing, and well thought out model lineups. And what's even more telling is where that curve is currently heading. Now, if we jump across to cars, because, well, where cars go, bikes usually follow in market trends, Chinese brands hit 9.7% of UK new car registrations in 2025. That's nearly double from the year before. And some of those brands didn't even exist in this market a couple of years ago. Take JQ, for example, one of my wife's favourite looking new modern cars. They weren't here before 2023, and in March 2026, it had the best-selling car in Britain award. It only held it for 1 month, but still, it knocked the Ford Puma off the top spot for that month, and that in itself is no small task. So if this pattern holds, we're no longer at the beginning of this takeover, we're somewhere in the middle of this trend. And this isn't just about cheap motorcycles anymore. This is a bigger conversation, because these brands have broken out of that cheap tat stage of their marketing cycle and their life, and they're now targeting more established brands and more established markets. Let's take a look at CFMoto with their, I think it's a 450 MT adventure bike. It's priced aggressively at £5,699, and it sits right in the middle of the smaller CC adventure lineup. In 2024, it went into one of MTN's group tests, and it was the A2 adventure bike test, I believe. It went up against the Honda CRF 300 Rally. It went against the Himalayan from Royal Enfield and the KTM 390 Adventure. And guess what? The CFMoto won. Not on price, as it was evenly matched, but it won on performance. Historically, Chinese bikes have always had this qualifier attached, that little asterisk that, well, they're good for the money. And it's quietly lowered the expectations of things like build quality, reliability, and overall satisfaction with the end product. But when something starts winning outright, when it's being put up against competitors and judged on the same terms, and it still comes out on top, well, that little asterisk disappears. And once it's gone, I don't really think, personally, you can put that asterisk back, because the bike starts to stand on its own 2 feet, it stands on its own merit and its own performance. You start seeing it elsewhere too. KTM's 790 Duke and 790 Adventure are both built in China by CFMoto. And BMW's F900 line of bikes, well, they're all developed and built in China. The up-and-coming Voge DS900X, it is a competitively priced bike, £8,999, and it has a great spec by all accounts. And it's running a BMW-derived engine, built in China alongside the 900 range of bikes. And it's aimed directly in competition to BMW's bikes. A lot of riders will happily trust a KTM or a BMW without necessarily realizing how much of that bike's DNA and story now runs through China. And that's where this whole Chinese bikes are garbage narrative gets a little bit more nuanced. Because what we're effectively saying is that any bike associated with China and manufacturing over there must be absolutely rubbish as well. And I get it, because it's not a theory that's born out of nothing. Early Chinese bikes did have build reputations, and it was tended to be on the cheap and rough and inconsistent side of things. Sometimes built to a price in a way that didn't inspire much confidence long-term in that bike. And reputations like that don't just disappear overnight. They take time to dispel and get proven wrong. They unfortunately linger like a fart in an elevator. They get passed on in forums and in pub conversations and in YouTube comment sections like these ones, sometimes long after the reality has completely changed. Then there's the practical side that I also can't deny. Dealer networks aren't as deep, and in many cases they are literally non-existent. And that comes with its own problems, because that means that parts availability can be, well, questionable at the best of times. And depending on the brand, they also don't seem to have enough long-term data to support resale values and where they're going to hold up or not. And these are, well, really important considerations, especially when it comes to separating yourself from your own money. But at the same time, the bikes themselves aren't standing still. These companies are hiring experienced engineers, often from the very European brands that they're now competing with. They're collaborating, not just copying and making cheap rip-offs of bikes that we know. They're building bikes that are being tested and reviewed, and in some cases coming out as the preferred winner. And that's creating a bit of tension for people like us, because there's two things happening at once. The reputation that's rooted in the past for brands like KTM and BMW, and products that are being very much built for the present, being shoehorned into that lineage. And I think the gap between those two is where most of the discussion and debate lives around these Chinese bikes. You can see it in the comment sections of most videos and on forums and Facebook groups when one of these bikes comes up and gets discussed, because some riders are already into these bikes. They've bought one, they've ridden it, they're living with it, and they're quietly wondering what all the fuss and hoo-ha has been about when they're out there clocking up all this mileage and travelling around on the bikes. And then there's the others who are just not quite so convinced at all just yet. And they're quietly sitting and watching, expecting something to go wrong, just so they can jump online and go, I told you so, I knew it was going to be junk. And then there's probably a bigger group, somewhere in the middle, including people like myself, who are curious and conflicted, possibly too stubborn to admit that they may have been wrong straight off the top of the bat, when they decided that Chinese bikes were the devil and we shouldn't be all riding them, and the same with cars. And we're kind of a little bit excited to see how this story is going to develop. which, if you think about it, is exactly where the Japanese brands were at one point in their life. Not trusted until all of a sudden they were. Not taken seriously until all of a sudden they couldn't be ignored. So maybe the more interesting question here isn't whether Chinese bikes are good or bad, because that question just feels far too simple. Maybe instead the question is about timing, how quickly that shift is actually happening, and where you sit as an audience with that as riders. And if the trajectory we're seeing in cars plays out the same way in bikes, this isn't something that's going to creep up quietly over a decade. It's going to keep moving extremely fast. Would you guys actually go out and buy a Chinese bike? And if not, what would it take for you to change your mind? Let me know in the comments below. Drop it below. I read every single one of them, and I do my very best to reply to every single one of them as well. And I look forward to seeing what your opinion is on Chinese bikes. And if you've enjoyed this video, then please do go check out some of my other videos. I'll stick a little playlist on the screen here of all of these investigation style videos that I've been doing over the last few weeks. And yeah, if you've not done so already, if you're currently a new viewer, new to the channel, or if you're a returning viewer and this is the second or third video you've watched so already, click my face just down here in the little round circle. You can subscribe to the channel. It doesn't cost you anything. Thank you very much for watching. Ride safe, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one.